My goodness, it is so hot in New York at the minute, and I'm like, I moved out the south to get away from this, and I'm currently melting in my apartment. So if I sweat and I'm looking really shiny during this episode, you know what. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another rather delayed episode of the Grid Girls Formula, a F1 podcast. My name is Zoe. I am your host, and we're going to be doing a very late, like I said, recap of the Canadian Grand Prix, which took place a couple weekends ago. My life has been a little bit hectic recently. I also apologize because I don't think I'm going to be able to have time to recap the Austrian Grand Prix, which is really too bad because I'm sure it'll be a great race. But today we're going to lock in and do the review of the Canadian Grand Prix. We're also going to be doing our technical tidbit today, talking all about the actual materials that a Formula One car is made out of. So hopefully it'll be interesting. So some of the biggest headlines coming into this week, since it has been a minute since we last caught up. Lance Stroll had surgery on his wrist. I think this is a kind of carryover from an injury that he had back in 2023. He didn't race at the Grand Prix before the Canadian Grand Prix, so he backed out at the last minute after going through qualifying, and then he skipped out on the race, unfortunately, due to the pain in his wrist, but he was able to make it back for the Grand Prix for his home race and participate, which is very exciting. I hope that he is having a good recovery. The 2026 calendar also came out with Imola is no longer on the roster, which I think is a little bit sad because it is just such a historic track and it was an exciting race this year, so it's a little bit sad to see that gone. I believe that Madrid came onto the calendar, though, so we have two Spanish Grand Prix. We've got Barcelona and Madrid, so that's kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to that. I love Madrid, so I am very excited to see them on the race roster for the year. The F1 movie also premiered in New York City this past week. I actually literally flew into New York City, like I was on vacation, and I came back the day of the premiere, and I was like, oh my gosh, I probably flew in with all of these F1 drivers. Like, I'm sure they landed at the same time as me and everything and just went straight into the city. And I wish I had been there. I wish that I had taken my butt into the city as well, but oh well, I missed it. Next year. I know they all missed me. I'm sure they were really regretting not inviting me and my wonderfulness. So their loss. I am looking forward to seeing the movie. I feel like I've heard some mixed reviews about it. A lot of people are saying that it is a good movie, but maybe not the best movie whenever it comes to like a Formula One fan, if you know what I mean. People who kind of understand the sport and know the ins and outs of it will probably find some flaws in some of the logic. That's what I've heard. And I'm very curious to see just how true that is. But I do just think any kind of work of fiction like that, like, by all means, like, you can move the rules around. Like, some of those Formula One rules are meant to be broken. So definitely want to do that in a movie. Like, some of the rules in Formula One are very hard to follow. And without them, honestly, we'd probably have some more exciting races every once in a while. So if they break it for some entertainment value, so be it. There's also been a lot of speculation about who the new drivers are going to be for the Cadillac team that is going to be joining next year. Actually, with Cadillac joining, I'm actually very curious about several things. Like, I don't know how they're going to be doing, like, Q1, Q2, Q3. Like, I wonder if they're still going to bump out 5 people per qualifying round, or if they will change those numbers with it being 22 people instead of 20. I'm very curious about how that will go. But anyway, there has been a lot of speculation around who is going to join Cadillac and what drivers might be in the mix for that. I've heard that Checo, Bottas, and some rookies, Mick Schumacher, I've heard all of those names get thrown around. So I'm very curious to see who winds up at Cadillac next year. Also, going off some like gossip and buzz and things, there has been a lot of discussion around Fred Vasseur, who is the team principal at Ferrari. Some murmurings of people maybe not being super pleased with his performance and the Ferrari performance at the minute, and some rumors about whether he's gonna be sticking around for a while or not. So I'm very curious how that goes. I hope he sticks around. I think that Ferrari has had a tough one this year, but then again, they have been fighting for second in the constructors title so far this year, so maybe they're not doing as bad as we think. It just feels like it because we're so used to them winning and we want them to win, but they have been consistent enough that they are still fighting for those top top positions whenever it comes to at least a Constructors' Championship. Okay, let's hop into our actual recap of the Canadian Grand Prix. So, starting off, we had free practice. During FP1, we had a red flag brought out due to a crash from Leclerc, and unfortunately he was not able to participate in FP2. There are also a few drivers who just kept missing the chicane. It's clearly a very tight turn, and some of them were struggling with it, including Hamilton, including the McLaren, so even the best of the best are struggling a little bit with those. And also Hülkenberg and Piastri also had moments with the wall in FP3 that resulted in some red flags. Okay, so jumping into qualifying, because you guys know I don't really care that much about free practice and we don't really need to spend a lot of time there. So, we had during Q1, Alex Albon's car basically exploded. Like the engine just like kaboom went away. Just very sudden, actually really cool to watch in my opinion. It was kind of wild. He struggled for sure. Props to the team for rebuilding it though, and he actually was done in time for him to get into Q2, which is exciting. Carlos Sainz actually really struggled in this qualifying session. He kind of had his lap ruined by traffic, and you could just hear his frustration over the radio. That is also just one of the reasons why I'm so curious about how they will handle Cadillac coming in, because there's already so much traffic during Q1, even Q2, that it's like really hard to get a good lap in. And it's so much more important that you get a good lap in on Q1, Q2 than it is later on, realistically, because you're fighting to get out of those bottom spots, and you are not guaranteed that until you have set a good lap. I'm very curious about that because the traffic is just always seeming to be a problem recently. Out in Q1, we had Bortoleto, Sainz, Stroll, Lawson, and Gasly. Moving on to Q2, Yuki Tsunoda actually made it through to Q2, which is definitely necessary because he actually wound up getting a 10-place grid penalty due to the fact that he didn't follow one of the red flags in FP3, so he needed to try to get up as high as he possibly could. And as I said, the final chicane, that just really was a struggle for a lot of the drivers. A lot of them just kept sliding and oversteering on the exit. And at the end of Q2, we had Tsunoda, Colapinto, Hülkenberg, Behrman, and Ocon get out. Then for Q3, Lando Norris was looking really, really good, actually. He was really speeding along. He looked like he had great race pace, but he just really struggled on his lap. He had to abandon it. He just couldn't quite get a clean lap, which is really too bad because, like I said, he was looking really, really good. And the fact that he wasn't able to get up there, disappointing for sure. And then we had George Russell setting an absolutely phenomenal lap. I was blown away, very surprised to see him qualify on pole. It was so exciting. Great execution, just perfect conditions. You could just tell that he was happy with that car underneath him, and he drove it to its max, and it was crazy because I feel like this is one of the only times it's not been Verstappen or McLaren on pole. Our top 10 wound up being George Russell on pole, then Verstappen, Piastri, Antonelli, Hamilton, Alonso, Norris, Leclerc, which Leclerc was down there, which is really sad, Hadjar. So despite Albon's little mishap with his engine, he actually did pretty well. Let's dive into the race. Opening lap. Obviously, very exciting, very fun, a little bit chaotic, always a good time trying to guess how people are going to go in those first few moments of the race. Alex Albon actually decided to turn into a lawnmower and go right over the track. He was really speeding over that grass. So I was like, dude, wow, that could not have been comfortable for you or your car. Unfortunately, I think that the bad luck for him just had to continue, and he actually had a power unit failure, which seems to be a little bit of an issue with these Mercedes engines. I hope that they figure that out, because I feel like a power unit failure is just the most sad way to not finish a race and to DNF. That being said, though, I saw a race in Silverstone in, oh gosh, what year was it? It must have been 2011, 2012, around that kind of time. And I remember because Vettel, it was in the midst of the Vettel-Hamilton fight, and Red Bull was struggling with power unit issues that year, and Vettel broke down right in front of me. And I have never been more excited. I love Sebastian Vettel now, but back then, no. I was a Hamilton fan, die hard. Vettel was the enemy. And seeing him break down was actually the most exciting thing that happened that entire race. It sucks from an empathy perspective to think about power unit failures, but when someone you don't really want to be winning has a power unit failure, it's like, ha! That's the best. There was also a little incident between Stroll and Gasly. So Stroll wound up getting a 10-second penalty after clashing. It seemed fair to me, but I did feel bad for Stroll with like his home race and the stuff with his wrist. He just also just doesn't seem to be able to catch a break. At the end of the race, we'll talk a little bit more about the McLarens in a minute, because obviously that was kind of like the highlight and we definitely need to get into that discussion. But George Russell's little jump when he won at the end, whenever he hoisted up his trophy, was just the most adorable thing ever. And it was also the first race with no McLaren on the podium in a while, which is crazy. And we obviously have to dive into what that means. So let's talk about the drama between the McLarens, because we all knew that it was coming. It was bound to happen at some point or another. I do think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, overall, this particular incident wasn't even that crazy in the grand scheme of things. It only took one of them out. It could have been worse, but it was still exciting. It was really exciting to see because they were having such a good battle. Like, watching them actually fight it out. Piastri had such a good move. Like, he really pulled one on Norris where he was like, he let him pass. You could kind of tell he like let him pass for the sake of being able to like do a little figure eight and come back and get him back afterwards. I thought that was just superb racing on Piastri's part. And that little like drag race that they were doing where they both had the DRS and Antonelli in front of them, he was saying something in the cool down room. He was like, oh, like we had to decide which one to give the slipstream to, which I thought was so funny. But because Piastri had the DRS from Antonelli, it kind of made all of the difference in the world, because they were able to stay up with each other along that straight. Otherwise, Norris would have had the DRS and would have been able to overtake. So it was so exciting to see that. And it was just like, oh, the heart was pumping. But in the end, Lando Norris just had to go for a gap that just didn't really seem to be there. And I know I'm not in these drivers' heads. I've not driven a car like this. I have no idea what they are actually thinking about, but I can imagine that they are just so in the moment that he is searching for any slight possibility. And there was a gap there at the beginning of the straight, but Piastri was so smart and just was like slowly edging himself over just little by little. And I feel like it almost was like Norris was so determined. He knew that his time was now, and that if he didn't do it right at that second, like, or on that lap, that he was probably going to fall back again, and like he really needed to make a move. And that was probably what was going through his head. And he probably had already processed earlier on in the straight the fact that that gap was there, and by the time he was able to actually execute, it wasn't. That is my only explanation for why logically it would make sense for him to have done what he did. And basically we all know what happened. He ran into the back of Piastri, lost his whole front wing. Race over for Lando Norris. It was really, really similar actually to 2011 Canada between Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton. If you watch the video, it's literally the exact same thing that happened. I do think it was really good on Norris's part. He took full accountability for it right away, full responsibility, and I do think that was definitely the right thing to do. And I think it is very indicative of the relationship between the team and between the teammates, the fact that he did that. And I also think a part of me thought he was going to be a little bit more upset and like dramatic with it, because I do feel like sometimes he can be, but I feel like he actually kept his cool in a very respectable way and was like, sorry guys, that was my bad. He got caught up in the moment and he just took it in his stride a little bit, which I appreciate seeing. I feel like we haven't seen that mindset as much with Lando Norris. So that kind of wraps up the whole McLaren situation. Let me know what you guys think about this little thing. Is it going to come to a head? Do you think that there's going to be more tension? Because I do just feel like both of them, even though Norris is a little bit more, I think, loud, outgoing, like he loses his cool a little bit more easily than Piastri, I do think that the combination of them just don't seem like a duo that's gonna let things kind of bubble up and explode. But then again, there is a championship title on the line, so we will just have to wait and see. But let me know what you guys think. On another note, I know I mentioned that Ferrari seemed to be having some struggles, and I think that was also shown during this race. Leclerc just did not seem to agree with the strategy that Ferrari was going with during this race. Like, he was just, I felt like they just kept playing him on the radio, disagreeing with everything, and I was like, this just doesn't seem like a very good dynamic to me. For I don't usually do a driver of the day, but I have to mention Kimi Antonelli because I was so proud of him. It was so cute. He got his first ever podium. It was so nice. Like, Verstappen and Russell let him do a little victory lap around in front of them, and he was just so excited on that podium. Thank goodness he's 18 and in Canada. Otherwise, I don't know if they would have let him use the champagne. I wonder what they do in that situation. So our ending lineup, we had Russell winning the race with Verstappen second and Antonelli third. Then we had Piastri, Leclerc, Hamilton, Alonso, Hülkenberg, who deserves a podium, by the way. I am going to continually say that. I think every single podcast from now on that Hülkenberg needs to have a podium because he has been in the sport for so long and has been such a name in the sport for so long that the fact that he has never been on the podium just blows my mind. Anyway, rant over. In ninth place, we had Ocon, then Sainz, Behrman, Tsunoda, Colapinto, Bortoleto, Gasly, Hadjar, Stroll, and then we had Norris, Lawson, and Albon, who DNF'd. So let's talk a little bit about the championship standings. We have Oscar Piastri in first with 198 points, and then we have Lando Norris in second with 176 points. So that gap has grown a little bit, with Norris having given up quite a few points by not finishing today. Then we have Verstappen in third with 155 points, and George Russell at fourth, 136, and Charles Leclerc in fifth with 104. Really, I think the fight is between the McLarens at this point. I know that Verstappen is just about, you could probably argue, in there, but I just don't think he has the car to be able to do it this year, quite frankly. For constructors, McLaren is leading the way with 374 points. I don't really see any changes to that happening this year, but we have Mercedes and Ferrari in second and third, so they swapped positions, which is exciting, and then Red Bull in fourth with 162. So 199, 183, and 162 for second, third, and fourth. So those ones are definitely close. Now, of course, we have to run through the F1 Academy because they also had a race this weekend. Actually, they had 3 races this weekend because I believe it was Miami. At their last race, unfortunately, one of the races got canceled. So typically they have 2 races per location that they go to, but they had to cancel it last time, so they had free races this time to make up for it. So for qualifying, we had Chloe Chambers qualifying first, Alicia Palmowski and Dorian Pan in third. So starting out with race 1, because all 3 of these races honestly are so exciting. They're very quick, they're very easy to watch. I highly recommend watching if you have not already. I've also been watching the F1 Academy documentary on Netflix. I'm like 3 episodes in at the minute, and it's so good. I'm like learning so much about these girls, and it's so exciting. It's so cool to hear them talk and just kind of experience their racing with them on a different level. So would highly recommend that if you are curious to know more about these girls and their experience in the F1 Academy. So race 1, side-by-side action straight away, no easing in here. There was a little bit of damage between Palmowski and Chloe Chambers, and Chambers wound up getting a little bit of debris that she had to deal with. Aurelia Nobles, her front wing broke when she got in contact with Dorian Pan, which shook up all of the front runners. I was actually very excited to see the wild card. I forgot her first name, but her last name's Pats. She actually was doing pretty well. She was looking like she was pretty like midfield pack. Unfortunately, it did not end the way that I'm sure she was hoping. But of all of the wild cards that we have seen so far, I think that she has done the best, in my opinion. Chloe Chambers, despite the getting a little bit of damage in the beginning, was going to keep on fighting, and that she did. She had another little battle between her and Dorian Pan, but I think eventually the damage got the best of her, unfortunately. There was also a moment where Rafaela Ferreira, she locked up and had to go and take the safety zone and go around, but she, as she was coming back on, she just kind of lost a little bit of control there and went straight into Chloe Chong, which just sucks for both of them because it's just, you're trying to avoid traffic. There's a lot going on. It's hard to do that. Joanne Conte also kind of joined in the chaos of that whole situation. So there's a lot of mayhem going on. At the end of race 1, we had Dorian Pan winning with Ella Lloyd and Nina Gateman in second and third. Then for race 2, Chloe Chong had a really had a pretty decent start. Honestly, she was holding pretty steady, but she lost some positions due to some contact. Chloe Chambers and Dorian Pan also had a little collision. Again, they seem to be having quite the rivalry, which is exciting to see develop. Maya Berg and Aurelia Nobles, they also ended up with a little bit more contact. And in the final lap, it was just chaos. It was so exciting. Everyone emerged from the restart. Like, it was like a go-kart restart. It was so thrilling. Felbermeyer, she seemed like she might have lost it for a minute. Honestly, I was like, oh, I think she's done. But she would manage to keep the pack and lead the race to the end, which was really exciting. And after she was disqualified, she actually finished on the podium for the first race, but she was disqualified. So she definitely needed a comeback, and I'm sure this was definitely the kind of comeback that she was hoping for. So at the end, we had Felbermeyer, Ella Lloyd, and Nina Gademan. Ella Lloyd was really consistent this weekend, so that was really exciting. Then for race 3, Palmowski, she had a little bit of spin on lap 1, which is very upsetting because she had really good momentum coming into this race. Pats also made some contact again, that wild card, and went out. Felbermeyer also had a spun. Also, I noticed that Maya Berg just didn't really seem to be in the mix this weekend. I feel like she's been so top tier the last few races, so I was surprised not to really see her name much this weekend. Leah Block also had another little incident, which is so hard to see because I really like Leah, and especially now that I've been watching the F1 Academy documentary, I'm so into her story and just I think she's so cool, but she really has been struggling this season. I'm not even sure how many races she's actually managed to finish. There were 3 safety cars throughout this race for various reasons, so it was very stop and go, but very exciting. I love a good restart. At the end of this, we had Chloe Chambers in first, Ella Lloyd, like I said, very consistent, second place all around this weekend, and Dorian Pan in third. Let's hop into our final segment of today's episode and do our little technical tidbits. We're going to be talking all about what F1 cars are made of, and honestly, that is primarily carbon fiber. So the Canadian Grand Prix gave us a lot of drama of all of the walls that were coming out of nowhere, like the Wall of Champions. So all of these cars have to be built in a way that's really safe, but also still really light. They need to be able to withstand these collisions with the walls of up to 200 more miles per hour. And the drivers nowadays, especially, it's a lot safer than it has ever been before. So a lot of that comes down to the materials that they are actually building these cars out of. And as I mentioned, that is almost entirely carbon fiber, also known as carbon fiber reinforced polymer, which is made up of 2 components. So we have the carbon fibers, which are really, really thin, super strong filaments that are embedded in a polymer matrix, such as an epoxy resin. And when these 2 are combined, you get a material that's super light, but also really, really strong, and also really, really malleable. So something that's really important is you see all of this bodywork on these cars. They have meticulously designed every divot, every little bump, every curve of that, and so they need to be able to have a material on there that's super, super malleable as well, and carbon fiber allows you to do that. 2 of the most important properties of carbon fiber are Young's modulus, and this is a measure of stiffness. So it tells us how much material is going to deform under stress. Carbon fiber has a very high Young's modulus, which means that it doesn't flex very much whenever it's under a load. That makes a really good, stiff, reactive chassis and suspension parts. Then we also need to know about tensile strength. So this is the maximum stress that a material can handle before breaking when it is stretched. And carbon fiber's tensile strength is it's off the charts. It's super high. It's not going to go anywhere if it is crafted correctly. So what you wind up with is a material that can take huge loads and hold its shape and also not weigh the car down, which is just such an imperative thing because every little milligram that you can take off of that car is more speed and more acceleration that that car can take. So the central area of a Formula One car, the monocoque, is a single carbon fiber shell that surrounds the driver, and it's literally designed to be basically indestructible under normal racing conditions. So inside, the driver sits surrounded by this capsule, but outside it's the primary structural components of the car. And thanks to that stiffness, it doesn't twist or deform very easily, which also helps to give drivers really good feedback of what the car is actually doing and how it's reacting to the racing line that they're taking. But here's the kicker, okay? So not everything is designed to be super, super stiff. Some things are actually designed to fail in a very specific way. And this is where I think like material science gets super, super interesting in the way that you can kind of play around with the different materials that you are using. Because think of it as like the glass that's used in your own vehicle, in your car. That glass is designed to shatter in a particular way so that it doesn't slice you in half if you ever get into a car accident. So a lot of the things that are put on a Formula One car are kind of thought through in a similar way. There are special crash structures that are made from carbon fiber as well, but specific fiber orientations and weaker resin bonding so that they crumple on impact instead of shattering. And they absorb a ton of energy by delaminating and fracturing, which slows the car down a lot more gradually during a crash, and then prevents a lot of that crash energy from actually having to be absorbed by the person sitting in the car. So they have those on the front and the rear, as well as some side impact structures. So there's some honeycomb panels that are wrapped in carbon fiber that also kind of take some of that impact from lateral hits. And it's required by FIA regulations to withstand these massive G-forces and distributed loads. The nose cones and wings, we see them whenever they hit something on the road. They're designed to kind of just shear off or shatter and dissipate to reduce the force being transmitted to the rest of the car. And you've seen that. We've seen the way that when somebody hits a wing, it's like the whole thing just kind of goes everywhere and there's a ton of debris that they have to deal with. And that is all for that reason of making sure that it is as safe as possible for the driver to crash. And as I kind of already touched on, shattering is actually a lot safer in these situations because it really dissipates the energy throughout the carbon fiber and just helps to keep that force away from the cockpit. So seeing that carbon fiber go everywhere, that means that it is doing exactly what it is supposed to do and protecting that driver. So the more you see shatter, possibly the safer that driver is. So basically, long story short, why don't we just use a ton of metal? Obviously, there is metal on these cars, don't get me wrong, but they don't use a lot of it. Metals like aluminum and titanium, they can be a lot stronger, technically, in some situations and orientations than carbon fiber can, but they also deform elastically, meaning that they bend and spring back, which isn't always the most ideal in racing. But with carbon fiber, you can really tune the layup and the way that you construct this carbon fiber however you want, and to be perfect for the design that you have come up with. So the reason that these Formula One cars survive the high-speed drama in a place like Montreal and the Canadian Grand Prix is because it's built with those materials that are a lot smarter, and they've put so much more thought into just the materials themselves and the fiber layout and all of that than we could ever really even begin to fully understand. They really give the teams that ability to dissipate energy and ensure that a driver stays as safe as possible during a crash. So, like I said, remember, next time that you see debris flying everywhere, remember that's not just chaos, that is a lot of hard thought out engineering. That is all that I have for today's episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I know this is delayed, but it was a longer one, so hopefully it's a little bit more exciting. And yeah, I will talk to you guys in a couple of weeks. We'll catch up a little bit about the Austrian Grand Prix and then the following races after that. And I'm so excited for that. So I hope you guys are having a great summer and it is not quite so boiling hot wherever you are. And I'll talk to you later. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and like, subscribe, comment, follow, do all of the things on whatever platform you are listening. And yeah, just let me know your thoughts on anything. I love chatting with you. So, bye!